Okay, it's time for the second video in this series introducing you to my new book, The Basic Truths of Gaudiya Philosophy. This time I'm going to start reading to you from the overview. After a short preface, Sri Jiva Goswami presents his thesis statement defining life's objective. Then, to determine the accuracy of this thesis, he launches into a description of how to ascertain truth. What's his thesis? His thesis is that the goal of life is Krishna, who is known in three ways, as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So Krishna is known, first of all, as pure consciousness without anything interfering with it. That's Brahman. Secondly, he's known as Paramatma, or the source of one's own individual consciousness. And thirdly, he's known as Bhagavan, or the most richly endowed and attractive object of that consciousness. So to get intangible contact with that object of consciousness, who's the root of one's own consciousness and who is pure consciousness without any problems, is the goal of life. The means to attain that goal is to hear about it, to hear about Krishna. And the result of attaining that goal is to completely fall in love with Krishna. So that's how Sri Jiva Goswami opens up the Tattva Sandarbha. But as soon as he says all this far out stuff, he says, well, how do I know if this is true at all or completely false? And then he says, I can't know unless I first of all establish some means or method or system of how you can differentiate a fantasy from a reality, a truth from a falsehood. And that brings him to the first section of the Tattva Sandarbha, which is quite large, which is where he explains the basis of how you can ascertain truth. Sri Jiva states that empirical observation has inherent flaws and limitations. And therefore, although it might serve as the foundation for empirical knowledge, it certainly cannot provide the basis by which absolute truth can be conclusively ascertained. He presents revelation as a solution to this problem, positing it as the basis from which observation and logic can bear reliable fruit. He presents the Veda as the primary verbal record of revelation, revealed by Vishnu to Brahma and coming into its modern form by the hand and direction of Vyasa. There's at least one really important point in this section which we all often get wrong. There's three facets or aspects or phases involved in knowing. First, there's the observation of it. Second, there's thinking about it. And third, there's the comprehension of it. So one of them is called pratyaksha, seeing things, observing things. The other is called anuman, considering them, thinking about them. And the other is called shabda, or the sound conclusion that actually contains the final knowledge. Now, it's a misconception that these three are completely independent from one another. They're all three interrelated parts of knowing. You can't know anything unless you have some knowledge of it, and unless you've thought about it, and unless you can see that knowledge in the actual world. So all three aspects of knowledge are always involved in gaining knowledge. However, there's two schools of approach to knowledge. One is called Viroha and one is called Avaroha. One is called the approach to knowledge which comes up, and the other is the approach to knowledge that comes down. So if you set up these three components of knowledge, observation, inference or thinking, and conclusion, then the upward process utilizes them in one direction and the downward process utilizes them in the other. The upward process is first observe, and then think about the data that you've observed, and then come to a conclusion. That's the modern scientific method, which is not just modern, it's always existed. Then the descending method is first get some information about the thing, then think about the validity of the information, and third, see if it's true in your observation. Both of these methods, the ascending and the descending, are valid and practical and useful in acquiring knowledge on a day-to-day basis. But the ascending method inherently has flaws which are insurmountable. The descending method also has inherent flaws. Sri Jiva Goswami is going to go into them, but those flaws are not insurmountable. The ascending method has insurmountable flaws because it's based on a process which is flawed, the observation. We can't really observe perfectly. So to get a perfect conclusion based on our observation as the starting point is not possible. Especially if you want to get knowledge about a very difficult subject that's very difficult to even observe, such as consciousness itself, then the ascending process isn't as useful anymore. And the descending process becomes essential. So that's the point he just made. And then he presents the Veda as the ideal record of descending knowledge. Now let's go back to reading the introduction. He presents these points very briefly, without considering doubts or opposition, because these principles were widely accepted in his contemporary target audience, and other authors had already addressed the arguments thoroughly. So if Jiva Goswami was to write the same book, but today, he would probably expand this first paragraph into a whole chapter. Because today there's a lot of confusion and disagreement about epistemology or the subject of how to gain knowledge. But at the time he wrote it, it was widely accepted that if you want to gain knowledge about transperceptual things, then you certainly need to base your investigation upon the statements found in the Veda. And so he just basically states it and then moves on to the next point. Let's read a little bit more in this introduction. Sri Jiva then admits of problems in using the Veda as the basis for ascertaining truth. And he presents the Purāṇas as a solution to these problems. For the Purāṇa are relatively intact, clear, and succinct. So he said that the problem of using the Veda is that a lot of it is not even available anymore. And even the partial record that we still have today is gigantic and difficult to study completely. And even on studying it, it's difficult to figure out what the conclusion is, probably because a lot of the key parts are missing. So he says the Purāṇas solve this problem. Some people, however, do not consider the Purāṇa a part of the Veda proper. So, Sri Jiva launches into a flurry of Vedic and Puranic quotes, proving the Purāṇas to be Vyasa's fifth division of Brahma's original Veda. So this is a really, really, really interesting part of the Tattva Sandarbha, and you're going to have to buy the book and read it, because I'm not going to be able to put it into a summary here. It's too detailed and I don't want to do it injustice. He then returns to explaining why the Purāṇa are better than the other four Veda. You see, previously he established that the Purāṇa are an equal part of the Veda, they're the fifth Veda, but now he comes back to his original point, which is that the Purāṇas were even better than the Vedas. So the fifth part of the Veda is even better than the other four parts. So now he's going to explain why. He then returns to explaining why the Purāṇas are better than the other four Vedas, because their express purpose was to complete and explain the other four, and because their meaning is intentionally made easier to comprehend. So one of the problems with the Veda was that it was incomplete. We don't have all of them anymore. That's not really such a problem with the Purāṇas. They're relatively complete and intact. Another problem with the Veda is that they're difficult to understand. That's not a problem with the Purāṇa. They were written especially to be easy to understand. And another problem with the Veda is that they're enormously gigantic. There's so many of them. That's not such a problem with the Purāṇa. There's many Purāṇa, but each one is designed to be quite self-contained. But still, there's some problems in using the Purāṇa as the basis of your investigation of truth. And Sri Jiva Goswami is going to get into that next. But we're going to end here. If you can't wait for next week's installment, go right now to my website and get a copy of my book. It's called The Basic Truths of Gaudiya Philosophy. It's an English rendition of Sri Jiva Goswami's Tattva Sandarbha.